Taming the High Cost of College, Episode 15.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello, and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we're going to be talking about offer letters and the appeal process. It's currently April, and if you happen to have a senior, you are getting offer letters right now. And right now you're comparing your financial aid offers and trying to decide which college is the best fit, both academically and financially. So for a lot of families, comparing offer letters is a bit of a challenge, and we'll get into that. If you happen to have a junior or sophomore or younger kids, you still want to pay attention and listen to this because offer letters are the end of the process. But if you're starting out your college planning, you want to understand what offer letters entail so you kind of know what you're shooting for. Obviously, people want to get good offer letters, but in order to get good offer letters, you have to work on the process starting early in your sophomore year, junior year, so that at the end of the process, the offer letters are what you expect and what you've planned for. We're also going to talk about the appeal process, what you can do if the offer letters aren't enough to cover the costs that you need covered, or if you had changes in your circumstances and you feel that the financial aid doesn't currently reflect your particular situation. And then finally, in Brad Recommends, we're going to talk a little bit about the Khan Academy, a great place to learn math and a number of other subjects, all for free. So let's jump into it. Let's start talking about the offer letters. So today we're going to talk about offer letters. First of all, what is an offer letter? Well, as you apply for college, there's two parallel processes. One is you apply for admission, which you do in the fall of your senior year, and you'll get some sort of admission from the college if they accept you. So they'll send you a letter or it'll be available online saying, we accept you for admission to the college. In addition to that, you will also get a financial aid offer or an offer letter. Offer letters typically come about this time of the year, again, when we're in April right now. So typically somewhere around April 1st to April 5th, you'll get most of your offer letters in hand by that time. If you applied to 5 or 6 colleges and you were accepted to 4 of those colleges, the 4 that accepted you will also send you a financial aid offer. And it's a formal letter that shows you the various types of financial aid that you will receive. Now, if you're not accepted at a college, let's say you applied late and you haven't yet to hear if you've been accepted, they're not going to send a financial offer until after they've accepted you. So the financial aid office doesn't work on any student that has not been accepted yet. Now, if it's April 5th or so and you still don't have an offer letter, and again, this is in the end of your senior year now, we're talking April 5th, you definitely need to figure out why you don't have offer letters from the colleges you've been accepted at. Most of the time, offer letters get held up because the student or the student's family has not provided all the information that the financial aid office needs. Another reason that offer letters get held up is because they've provided you the letter, you just didn't know where to look for it. A lot of colleges now will not mail anything. They will just provide the information on the website, and most accepted students now are going to have a username and password where they can log in to a protected website and see what's going on with their application, what's going on with their financial aid. So you can just go in and find your offer letter on the website of the particular college. Now, some colleges will also mail the offer letter, but other colleges will just send an email to the email on record, which is typically the email that was on your application, notify you that there is an offer letter available. So as you're in the final stretches of applying for colleges, you want to stay in contact with the colleges by going into their websites and paying attention to all the stuff that's available there. So what does an offer letter look like? A typical offer letter is going to have components in it about what the college costs and what financial aid help they're willing to provide you. Now, the colleges are going to administer financial aid from the college itself. The colleges also administer federal financial aid. So they're the ones that are going to administer all the various federal programs, which would be the Pell Grant, the Supplemental Grant, Work Study, the Perkins Loan, the Stafford Loan, and the PLUS Loan. So for all 6 of those federal programs, as well as a few tangential ones, your point of contact to get more information and work on those particular programs is through the college financial aid office. So let's talk about what a typical financial aid offer looks like. Let's say we're going to talk about a typical state school first. So as an example, it might say that tuition is $16,000, fees for that particular school are $1,000, and room and board is $9,000. They may also include other costs of attendance like travel or books or other things like that. So that'll give you the total, either the actual billable costs. In other words, you're going to get a bill for tuition, fees, room and board, and they'll leave off things like travel and books, which of course you're going to have to spend money on, but it's not part of the official bill. So they're not going to, some schools don't put that on there. And then they're also going to show you all the various benefits that you receive. Now, a basic offer might just have a couple of loans on it. It might say $5,500 for an unsubsidized direct loan, and then a plus loan, which is a loan to the parents for $18,000, and between the two, that covers the entire cost. A more complex offer, especially for families that show a relatively high need, might have an offer that looks like this: $3,000 Pell Grant, $2,000 Perkins loan, $3,000 in state aid, $10,000 in a scholarship, $5,000 in a grant, $2,000 work study, and $12,000 in a Parent Plus loan. Depending on your family and the college, you may get some or all of the categories I just mentioned. The next step is to kind of compare offers and see what you're getting from each college. So how do you compare? Well, again, it's going to have your total cost of attendance there. So it's going to show you not necessarily total cost of attendance, but it'll have the current tuition, fees, and room and board. So you can start with those numbers as to what the total bill will be. And then what I recommend families do is you subtract off all the grants and scholarships. So that way you get kind of what the net bill will be, minus, you take off the grants and scholarships, you will get credit for that typically right on the bill. So if you accepted the grants and scholarships when you get your bill in typically August, it's going to say the total cost for tuition, room and boards, and fees is, say, $15,000. But we also granted you a $6,000 scholarship, so your net bill is $9,000. So that's the first step, is to take off all the money, essentially what I would call the free money, or the grants and the scholarships. And you do that for every award. So you can build a little spreadsheet that says tuition at school A, B, C, D, and then fees at the 4 different schools, and then room and board at the 4 different schools, and then the total price at the 4 different schools. And then for each school, you can take off the grants and scholarships if you've received any. Unfortunately, there's a whole lot of families out there that don't get any sort of grants or scholarships. So that piece, it isn't as effective. Then from there, you look at it and say, all right, well, total cost is, hypothetically, let's say at a state school is $26,000. We've got a $5,000 scholarship. Let's say we got that scholarship from where dad works. So that means we have a net cost of $21,000. Then you can go back and look up how much you received in what I would call self-help aid. In other words, loans and work. So you may have been awarded a work study job of some sort. And typically, almost all families are awarded the direct student loan, and all families typically have access to the plus loan. So now a typical freshman would be able to take another $5,500 off of that $21,000 because they're eligible for the Stafford loan. And if you need more information about the Stafford loan, in some of the prior podcasts, we talk about the various types of financial aid. Now, once you have your net cost after loans and work, that kind of shows you the net price that's still going to have to be paid either by the student or by the parents. You may be comparing that to, let's say, a private school. So a private school offer might look something like this. Total tuition, $39,000. Fees, $1,000. Room and board, $10,000. For a total cost of $50,000. This is a school where your student was a strong candidate. Perhaps they won some sort of scholarship from the private school. And again, a lot of private schools offer some scholarships as a goal to get their cost close to the net cost of the typical state school. So in this example, total cost at this school is $50,000. If you won the presidential scholarship, hypothetically, for $20,000, and you also have the scholarship from school of $5,000, that brings your net cost at that particular school to $25,000. Now from there, you also can take off the loans and the work, and that will bring you to the final net cost. I will put a spreadsheet in the show notes so that you can come and take a look. But in general, what we try and do is kind of net things out and try and be fair. Now, a lot of colleges are going to do a couple things that confuse people. One is they will provide and fill the gap with what we call the plus loan or the loan to the parents. So especially schools where there's a high net cost left over. So they'll say our total cost of this college is $50,000. You get a $5,000 scholarship, a $5,000 loan to the student, and a $40,000 plus loan to the parents. And that's how you can pay for school. That's an effective way to pay, but that plus loan is available to parents at any school. So it's not an aid that's specific to that school. You can use a plus loan to fill the gaps at any school, most state schools and most private schools. So that's really not aid per se, but it is one way to borrow money and fill the gap. Of course, you could also borrow money on your home equity line of credit, or you could borrow money on a private student loan. So there's lots of ways you could borrow money to fill the gap. So the plus loan is one option, but I don't think, some colleges will put that on the award, and it makes their award look better than colleges that don't put that on their award. Now, once you've calculated a net price for all your schools, what you may find is that some schools will cost substantially less than others, or in some cases, the prices may be about the same. So I've seen situations where families are saying, well, I can go to private school A or private school B for about the same cost as my local state school. And therefore, money's really not part of the decision anymore. The costs are within a few $1,000s, and we're going to go to the school that's the best fit. Other times, though, I've seen families where some of the schools are substantially more expensive than others. And it's not always the state schools that are the low cost. Sometimes it is the private school. So I've seen situations, as an example, where a student can go to Princeton for $24,000, or they can go to University of Chicago for $37,000, or they can go to the local state school for $20,000, and they just kind of have to decide, is it worth it to spend more money to go to one school over the other? And for some families, obviously, money is one of the bigger issues in the decision process. For other families, it's more of a value proposition. I'm willing to spend more money if I think it's worth it. And that's, of course, family politics gets involved as far as what the students really like or want to go to and what the parents are willing to spend, assuming it's their money that's being spent. So once we're done with the comparisons, there's some additional things that we can consider, and that would be the overall appeal process. The offers that you receive from the schools are their best offer based on the information that you've given them so far. Now, for a lot of schools, that isn't necessarily their final offer. They may be able to do better. And certainly if your circumstances have changed, as an example, that's a great opportunity to go back to the school and explain your situation a little bit more and see if they can do better. So what might be grounds for an appeal? Certainly anything that's substantial as far as changes in your financial situation would be grounds for appeal. So if the family is divorcing, or if there was a job loss, or a big one that happened a number of years ago was Hurricane Katrina. When it wiped out a number of businesses, those business owners, if they had kids in college, were able to appeal the process and say, well, yeah, last year I had a really good income. This year my business is essentially destroyed, so I need to change what's on the financial aid forms. Now, the appeal process is done through the financial aid office of the colleges that you're interested in. And you want to be polite. So as you're appealing, you want to work with the college. There's a few officers at every college that have what we would call professional judgment. And it's their opinion as to whether or not something should be changed. So they can actually change the way that the FAFSA reads, or change the inputs on the FAFSA or any other financial aid application based on their professional judgment. So if you went to them and said, well, we lost our job, the high income is no longer available, they may agree with you and they'll typically ask for documentation, by the way, but they may agree with you and say, you're right, we're going to adjust the income and recalculate financial aid and come up with a different number. So that's the appeal process based on things that may actually happen. Now, some colleges as well are willing to accept appeals not just based on circumstances, but also on competition. In other words, if you said, well, I can go to private school A for a net cost of $40,000, or I can go to private school B for a net cost of $30,000, but we really like the more expensive school, sometimes as part of the appeal process, you may have the ability to talk with that school and they may increase their financial aid award to be more in line with the other college, especially if that college is of equal caliber. In other words, if you go to a high-end school, you go to Purdue, let's say, or you go to University of California, LA, UCLA, and say, well, I'm getting a better financial offer from another school. Oftentimes, they're going to say, well, we're sorry, but that school is not our caliber, and if you like our school, we feel that we're worth it, and we're not going to adjust things. Other schools, especially if they say, well, that's a comparable school to us, maybe they'll meet you halfway, maybe they'll match the award. What you want to avoid is trying to get into a bidding war. Colleges really don't like that if you're going to say, go back and forth between them and see who ultimately is going to give the best price. It may work or it may backfire where eventually they might just withdraw their award altogether. So the proper way to appeal an award is to really only work with schools that you're interested in attending. Let's say you're in that situation where school A is $40,000, school B is $30,000. You really want to go to school A, but that $10,000 really is more than you want to spend or more than you can afford to spend. If the student really likes the more expensive school, as a family, you should start working with the school. The student should be very much involved because it's his life or her life, and she's the ultimate customer at that particular college. So they certainly want to hear from her. Often, mom and dad are there for support. When we start talking about income and assets and financial aid forms, the students may not have all the details and be able to provide all the information. So you might do a joint call to the financial aid office if it's relatively far away. If the school is relatively close and you can do it in person, that may be more effective. But your goal is just to have an honest conversation with the college and let them know kind of where you stand. So as an example, you might say things like, well, the student again might say, well, mom and dad really kind of are only willing to provide $20,000 a year. And in addition to that, I need to come up with the rest. So then the student would ask questions like, well, is there any other aid available? Are there jobs or scholarships that I should be applying for? Are there other types of loans? What else can I do to fill the gap? Because right now I want to attend a school that's more expensive and my parents don't want to fill the gap. So that might be the tact of the appeal process, where the student needs to be excited about the school, needs to say, if this is where I want to be, and then the school may compete for that student. Now, especially if your student's on the higher end of a typical applicant at that school, you may get some traction. If they're a below average applicant at a lot of schools, you may not get much traction, but it's worth a try. I've had reasonable luck with families that go back. And again, it's not typically huge adjustments. They're not going to say, well, it used to cost $50, now it's going to cost $10,000. I suppose that may happen occasionally, but I've not seen that very often. But what I have seen is where colleges will say, well, we've got an extra $5,000 or extra $6,000 in scholarship that we can award to you. Or we'll provide you this low-cost loan. This is a 0% loan for $5,000 or for $10,000 to help you fill the gap. And we just ask that you pay the money back. And those loans may come directly from the college itself. Or they may say, well, you don't qualify for work study, but we do have some jobs on campus that you can apply for, where you can work on campus and earn an extra $3,000 or $4,000 to cover your expenses. As you move into the appeal process, a lot of the colleges have very specific forms that they're going to want you to fill out. So as you're working with them, they might come back and say, we need this form filled out. We need all the data. We need supporting documentation. You said you lost your job. Do you have a termination letter? Do you have a severance package information? What is it that you can provide that documents the job loss? Or in a divorce situation, they may want to see some of the divorce paperwork. Or occasionally colleges will say, well, you're getting a better offer from elsewhere. Send us a copy of the offer so we know what we're up against. So you want to work with the colleges. It's a busy time in April, especially if you've got 3 or 4 offers that you're working on. It's a busy time at the colleges too, realize that. So you want to provide whatever they ask for in a very timely manner and jump through the hoops that they ask you to jump through, even though you might consider it a bit of busy work. So that's the appeal process. And that also, that can provide a little additional funds or a lot, again, depending on if there's been major errors or if it's been relatively accurate. So after listening to this, what should you be doing if you have a high school junior, sophomore, or younger kids? So hopefully you've learned the process that's coming at the end of your senior year. But what can you do now with younger kids, before it's time to appeal and before it's time to get the actual offer letters? Well, as I've mentioned in the past, colleges have what's called a net price calculator available on their websites. And that net price calculator is a way for you to get some estimates of what your offer letter is going to look like in the future. So you can take your existing income and assets and put the data into the net price calculator and figure out what an offer might look like in the future. And that may be a way for you to kind of hone in on what colleges belong on your list and what colleges may not belong on your list. Unfortunately, a whole lot of families don't really understand the net price of any particular college until now, April in their senior year. So they're very end of the process and they're saying, oh my goodness, these 3 colleges are so expensive. And this last college, we don't really like it, but that's the only one that makes sense as far as a financial piece of the puzzle. And unfortunately, that's a problem that was created a year ago when you put together your college list. So if you're currently working with, you have juniors or sophomores or younger kids, now would be a great time if you put this kind of effort into learning what's coming. Now would be a great time for you to start figuring out how colleges are going to treat your family. Figure out if you're going to qualify for need-based aid and merit aid. And if you are going to qualify, try and get an estimate at the colleges that you're considering. So you can essentially come up with what you think an offer might look like a year or 2 from now. And if you look at those offers and you say, well, these types of offers would not be something we're interested in, they're too expensive or they're not the right college fit for academics or whatever, you can go back and change your list and find colleges where you might be a stronger fit. I talked about the 5 types of colleges in one of my previous episodes and how they may treat various families. So you may need to find that episode and listen to that because there's 5 different types of colleges out there and each type of college works a little differently as far as how financial aid and need-based aid and merit aid all work at their particular college. But if you're listening to this and again, maybe you've got a senior and a sophomore or you just have a sophomore and you're saying, wow, that's interesting. I know offer letters are coming at the end of the senior year. I think for most families, spending some time to try and figure out, well, how will it work for me? And doing that ahead of time so that you don't get a surprise. I hear from families every year about this time who essentially are saying, we didn't realize it was going to be this expensive, or we have a really good student. We thought he'd get a whole bunch of scholarships or whatever it might be. So take this information and use it to plan ahead where you can. And of course, if you have a senior now and you're kind of at the end of the road, do what you can in the appeal process. And you can also regroup for next year if you're running into problems, as far as perhaps you do need to go to the low-cost state school for a year, and then you can reapply to new schools and transfer in your sophomore year. Other considerations are whether or not you might be going on to grad school. Sometimes families are trying to decide, should I go to the local state school for undergrad and then go to the more expensive school for my master's or PhD? And that might be a strategy. Or are there transfer programs to get into the colleges you're interested in by going somewhere else at a lower cost and then transferring in? Obviously, the transfer programs for some families aren't a good fit because you're looking for that college experience, where you don't want to be going to the local community college and transferring to the name brand school in the future. You just want to get off to college and get started and not be living at home and not be having to make friends and then change schools and make friends again. So that's, of course, the disadvantage as well. So hopefully this information has been useful.
The latest tips, tricks, and tools you can use today. This is Brad Recommends on Taming the High Cost of College.
Today on Brad Recommends, I'm recommending a website called Khan Academy. Khan is spelled Khan, so it's khanacademy.org. Khan Academy is a great instructional website where they do a lot of teaching on core subjects like math and science and computer science. And there's short lectures on all kinds of different topics related to math and all kinds of different topics. They also have some SAT, ACT prep available at the site, and they're constantly adding more and new lectures. There's a particular topic your student needs help with, whether it's a math concept or many others, you can look it up at Khan Academy. You can also do some test prep for the SAT or the ACT, and it's a great resource. It's all free. All you need to do is set up an account, and you can log in and get all the information you might need on just about any subject. So again, that's khanacademy.org. All right, that ends our podcast for today. So if you're enjoying what you're hearing, I would appreciate if you pass this information along to others. If you're listening to this podcast directly on your computer, Just be aware that podcasts can be portable. There are ways to download podcasts to your phone or other portable device, your iPod as an example, or iPad. So there's ways to make it mobile. I listen to a lot of podcasts while I'm driving. Other people listen to podcasts while they're exercising. So you're welcome to listen directly on the computer, but there are ways to get this more mobile. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, I would also appreciate any feedback. If there's questions that you have, you can go to our website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com, and there's a leave voicemail feedback where you can send us a voicemail directly through the computer, or you can send us an email. Any sort of feedback that on questions or other areas that you want to learn about would be appreciated. And you also give us a review in iTunes if you get a chance. And again, our show is Taming the High Cost of College in iTunes, and we're also available on Stitcher. That's all we have for today, and we'll see you in a week or two.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns two companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.